This morning, jury selection resumes for ex-Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin's trial in the death of George Floyd. 3 jurors have now been seated. Chauvin has pleaded not guilty. Question this morning, what will his defense strategy look like? Joining us now, CNN legal analyst and criminal defense attorney Joey Jackson and retired LAPD Police Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey. So, Joey, what are the mega arguments you expect to see from the defense?
Yeah, good morning to you, John. I think the defense is going to do a few things. Let's start with number one, causation. What do I mean? I think they're going to speak to, you'll see a lot of medical testimony around the issue of cause of death, right? I think the defense will say, don't believe your lying eyes. I think they'll point to pre-existing conditions that he may have had. I think they'll look and explore the issue of any drugs that was in his system. So that'll be central. You'll hear a lot of expert testimony with respect to that. Then they're going to pivot to the issue of the use of force and talk about and blame, right, George Floyd. Hey, he was non-compliant. The force we used was necessary under the circumstances. We thought he could get out of the controlled hold he was in. If he did, he would represent a danger. From the outset, he was causing a problem. So you'll see a lot of blame placed on him. Again, John, be ready for the experts as it relates to police force, the appropriateness of the force. And then finally, I think they will try to use as much adverse material against George Floyd as they can with regard to his past, his background, what he did, what he didn't do. As much as the judge will allow, they will try to make him as unsympathetic. Final point, the defense has already indicated to the judge that they don't want George Floyd referred to as the victim. So that'll be the strategy to be sure from a defense perspective.
So, Cheryl, it's victim blaming. It's blaming George Floyd to an extent. How hard do you expect the defense to lean into that? And how will that affect what we're seeing right now, which is jury selection?
Well, I expect them to lean in very hard. And if you wind up with a jury that doesn't look anything like me or Mr. Floyd, it won't be very difficult for them to dirty him up is what they're trying to do. And so, listen, the bottom line for me is this, and everyone needs to understand, George Floyd was in handcuffs. So he was under their dominion and control. It wasn't about getting compliance or gaining control of him. He was in that. And for Derek Chauvin to sit on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds translated, in my mind, only to punishment. There was no other reason for it. It didn't matter what happened before. It doesn't matter who George Floyd is then or now. He was in handcuffs. He was in control.
And Joey, the judge says the state only needs to prove that Chauvin's actions contributed to the death, that not they were the sole cause of death. So that gets to the issue of drugs there, right? Maybe the knee on the neck contributed to it, even though there were drugs in the system. How does the defense get around that?
Well, that's a very important point, and it's not so much even the judge saying it, that's the law, right? It's the contributing factor, not the sole factor. But I think that's when you'll hear a lot of the medical testimony, a lot of the medical evidence with respect to what he had. If it were not for the things in his system, would he have died anyway? If it was not for his pre-existing condition, would he have died anyway? This is an appropriate hold that is used. And to raise, the very important point that Cheryl just did, it's important to note he was in cuffs and expect blowback on that. You're going to hear the defense say, notwithstanding the fact that he was in cuffs and in dominion and control, he could have represented a danger. So they will go after him hard. And finally, John, as to the sole issue, they will say, yes, the neck compression, that was something that they needed to do under the circumstances because he simply was not compliant. There's going to be a lot of victim shaming here. And again, they're going to ask you not to believe your lying eyes. This was egregious. Everyone had a visceral reaction to it. It's very tough for the defense to overcome this, but they're going to attack in that regard.
So, Cheryl, 3 jurors selected yesterday. What stood out to you in terms of the questions that they were asked and who exactly was chosen?
Well, what stands out to me is that the questions seem to be designed to benefit the defense. Certainly, there's reportedly only about 12% of the prospective jurors that are actually Black. And so if any Black person, in my mind, answers affirmatively to the questions that we've heard posed, then that's a reason, in my mind, for the defense to strike. And they've got 15 strikes, many more than the prosecution. So I think the fix is in. They want a predominantly white jury, and they will be sympathetic to Derek Chauvin's shenanigans.
Joey, there's this issue of third-degree murder, which is working its way through the courts right now. How much does the prosecution want that?
I think they want it quite a bit, right? So just to be clear very briefly, if they get the third-degree murder charge, they have 3 bites at the apple. The first is it relates to unintentional murder. They merely have to show that as the prosecution, that there was an action here by Chauvin, and that action of assault, right, in the commission of a felony, there was a death, right? And of course, the defense will say, oh, he wasn't assaulting him, he was getting him under control. When you pivot to the issue of manslaughter, now the prosecution, John, just has to show an unreasonable risk, that there was negligence on the part of Chauvin. But to your point, if they don't get that, now you get to third-degree murder. What does that mean? It means your actions were depraved, they were reckless. Now, it has been used very briefly with regard to firing a shot into a crowd where you put a whole bunch of people in danger and one dies. The whole legal issue surrounding this is if it's been used in that regard to mean you represented a danger to a crowd and only one person died, how can you apply it here? That's the legal issue going through the courts. The courts have said in the past that depravity can apply to one person. If the prosecution gets that, they get 3 shots at the apple. Any one of those could send him to jail, that is Chauvin, for a very long time.
Joey Jackson, Cheryl Dorsey, thank you both very much, raising a lot of interesting legal questions we'll watch over the next few weeks. Allison?
Thanks, John.
John, here's what else to watch today.